Consent, how we normally explain it is it's kind of like a no trespassing sign, right? So if you've seen like, like do not enter signs, it's kind of like that. You can also kind of use the analogy of a traffic light, right? Where there's red, yellow, and green. And, you can decide if say it's red, it means it's a no go on a certain activity or even a certain conversation. If it's yellow, it's kind of like a proceed with caution situation where you're not fully sure if you want to like do something or say something, you're not sure how you feel about the situation. And a green is like clear yes or go ahead for certain activity, certain conversations, and situation. There's really a lot of different aspects of consent that need to be accounted for, right? So the acronym that we use at Pratisandhi is called VISOR, which is basically V being voluntary, I being informed, which means you know exactly what you're talking about. You can't consent to something if you don't know what you're talking about, right? Like it's almost like me asking you, hey, do you want to go on a roller coaster? And then I suddenly take you bungee jumping, right? So you can't consent to bungee jumping if you just said yes to like a roller coaster. S is sober and specific, E is enthusiastic, and R is reversible. So these are some key, components that help really define consent and help you identify whether a situation is consensual or not. If you don't have somebody's consent to engage in any kind of activity, well, then of course you're violating their boundaries, and of course, not just that, you're also possibly committing a crime. Even just outside of sexual activity, consent is very important, and I always try to give examples outside of sexual activity. And this is because, it's easy to see how consent applies in all aspects of our life. Sexually speaking, obviously, if you don't have consent, that amounts to sexual assault, that amounts to rape. And those are really not just going to have a very detrimental effect on, the person who's the victim, but also it's a crime and you will be punished for it, and, you can be jailed for it. Even if it wasn't a crime, I think it's just part of being a decent human being, right? Before you take something, you ask. Before you engage in something, you ask for permission, you ask if the other person's comfortable with something. So, really, it's just a part of also being a decent person. If I want to go on like a bike ride with my friends, I'm going to text them and ask them, hey, do you want to go for a bike ride? Right? That's me asking for consent, asking if they are up for something, asking if they're feeling enthusiastic about participating in an activity with me, right? So it's not just about like sexual consent. It's we ask for consent in our daily lives in all situations. Can I borrow something of yours? Would you like to try like this sexual activity? Can I kiss you? Can I hug you? Would it be okay if we had a certain conversation? Are you in the mental space to have a certain conversation? For all things, we should be asking for consent. Whenever there's anyone other than you yourself involved, you should be asking them if they're okay with that situation. Between partners or even between friends, anybody can take the onus of asking for consent, right? But of course, usually the responsibility lies with the person initiating the activity or initiating the conversation. May I please? Can I? Would you want to? Are you okay with XYZ? I think also a few important factors are making sure that the other person's in the right frame of mind to have that conversation. And that also includes being a little aware of things like body language, right? Just being a little bit aware of the location, being aware of the context, making sure you're not making the other person uncomfortable just by asking as well, right? But also making sure that you're asserting your boundaries. So I could always say in front of my boyfriend's parents that, hey, I wanted to talk to you about something, let me know, when we have a moment, I wanted to have a private conversation. I think those are some things to be aware of when asking for consent. But other than that, it's like asking for anything else, right? Like when you're at work, you ask if you can do something. When you're in school, you ask if you can step out of the classroom, or if you can change your seats or things like that. So normally, when it comes to consent, you want to make sure that you're being very clear about your own boundaries. Giving consent, enthusiastic yes, or even if it's not a yes, saying something like, I'm not sure right now. Maybe we can circle back to this. So giving alternatives, making sure that even the person you're talking to isn't necessarily always taking it personally, especially if you don't intend it that way. So, especially saying no sometimes can make us very, very uncomfortable. And I think there's an art to it and it takes practice, right? To be like, oh, okay, no, I don't want to do this, and being clear about our boundaries. Sometimes we feel bad about saying no. My friends will feel bad if I say no, but it's really more about you and your boundaries. So it's about making that aspect very, very clear. And definitely, being aware of your tone. So, like, I remember, I was talking to these school kids. Young boy was sharing a story with me, and he said that, I asked this girl out in my class. She said, "Ew, no, why would I ever date you?" That's on the young girl to not want to date somebody, but it's also her responsibility to be respectful about that in that specific situation, right? You don't need to hurt somebody. If they're constantly changing the topic, if they're kind of circling or beating around the bush, that can be a bit of a sign that they're unsure, maybe they're nervous, maybe they're anxious. Could be a lot of things. But those are some telltale signs. Some body language signs could really be, keeping their arms crossed, not making eye contact, stuttering a little bit, or just be like, I don't know, Even just like an I don't know should really be an immediate sign that it's not a clear yes, right? And maybe they just need more time to open up to the idea, and maybe they're just completely against it, and maybe they just haven't decided how they feel about it yet. Tomorrow I go for a bike ride and I change my mind that, hey, I don't feel like biking anymore, I just want to go home. I can totally do that. And the same thing goes for sexual activity. Maybe today I feel like I might be comfortable with X activity, and tomorrow while I try it I realize I'm not liking this. So it's totally okay to change your mind and communicate that, hey, I thought I'll be fine with this, I thought I'd be into it and I wanted to try it, but I realized I'm not. So of course you can revoke consent. If the person you're engaging in sexual activity with is a stranger, right? Somebody you know really nothing about, you guys don't have a rapport, then I would say at every step, are you okay with me kissing you? Are you okay if we take it a step further? Would you be okay if I touch you here? There's lots of different ways of asking, right? And also gauging a little bit by body language. But obviously, if you have a rapport with somebody, you don't necessarily always have to ask, because that's not always realistic, right? Like, if, say, I'm in a relationship and we have an established sexual history, my partner may simply ask me, hey, do you want to engage in like sex? And if I say yes, maybe they don't need to break down each activity, right? They don't need to be like, oh, can I touch you here? Can I touch you there? Can we do X? Can we do Y? But obviously, that's only once we've had time to establish that rapport, when we have that comfort level. But obviously, if it's a stranger, if it's somebody you don't know as well, it's always a good practice to keep asking. Even with your partner, even when you have a rapport, there may be lesser need, but there is still a need. If I want to go to the market with my parents, I will ask them every time, right? Even though they're my parents and they're very unlikely to say no, right? I've known them for years. Why will they say no to go to the market? But maybe they're just not in the mood that time, right? So obviously, in those situations, rapport doesn't change anything. If somebody says, I don't know, you wait until they know for sure, whether that is waiting 1 hour, or whether that's waiting like 1 month, or whether that's waiting 1 year, or never. Okay, or if they just say no. But making sure that you have explicit consent. So if you're not consent, if you're not sure, if you're feeling like your partner saying like, I don't know, I'm not certain if I'm like up for this, then take a step back and be like, all right, like, it sounds like you're not ready for this. Do you want to maybe do something else, right? Or do you maybe want to circle back to this? So really don't engage in the activity if you're not certain that you have consent. Sometimes you won't know where your boundary lies until you're posed with the situation, right? Other times you can maybe hypothetically try and see how you feel about certain things. So certain aspects for people are just complete no, right? They're hard boundaries, that this is an activity I absolutely don't want to do, right? For certain other activities, there may be some wiggle room, right? I'm not sure how I feel about it. Maybe I'd want to try it, but I might not like it. As an emotional boundary, I need certain things from my partner, right? Like, I need my partner to be honest with me, right? That's a completely explicit emotional boundary, right? It's about your own value systems. So it takes a lot of conscious reflection and understanding what you're okay and what you're not okay with. And also, I think really listening to your mind and your body when you're in these situations. You'll realize very often, even when you're around friends, certain things that maybe your friends say, or maybe certain situations you're in, and those little feelings of discomfort can be indications that you might want boundaries. If you're feeling yourself getting extremely upset about something, of course that is a clear sign that there's a boundary that's required in this context. If they're trying to put some physical distance between the two of you, and if they generally seem a little unsure, they're fidgeting, they're not making eye contact with you, they're kind of constantly touching their ear or their hair or something like that, those can be signs that, somebody's feeling uncomfortable. And that in turn can be a sign that you don't have consent. On the other hand, getting consent, while I will say that you should try not to rely on only non-verbal cues to see that you got consent. You should always rely on verbally explicitly stated things. Nonetheless, things like being enthusiastic or being excited, right, or taking initiative to partake in that activity. Those are signs that the other person's really into it.